Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes, it was a very different London. It wasn't so noisy. You are chatty, aren't you? 4 decades ago, I mean, that time has flown. And coming through this art museum, I remember the biggest political organizing we did at that time was against apartheid. And Steve Biko had been killed. And I remember we made a coffin, and we were about 8 of us. That was the movement. And we walked to the University Art Museum, and there were about 100 policemen. And, for very long I've known just a few of us organizing puts the panic. So we have to keep organizing. Of course, the project for organizing for inequality is very well organized. Rarely in the open, but very, very intimately organized. We're just seeing the news that Marie Le Pen, who's the Trump of France, has just had a meeting with Putin. So, the people still stuck with the idea there's a Cold War, and, on the one side you have America, on the other side you have the Soviet Union. No, Putin is part of that tiny group of men who want to use violence. I mean, how many ambassadors of Russia have been killed in the last few weeks? And of course, what's happening in the US tells us how intimate this club is. It always was, since 500 years ago. Just go back and think, it took one Columbus going to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel and setting off to colonize the world. He, of course, thought he was coming to India. Everyone wanted to come to India at that time, and again, everyone wants to come to India. And landed in Haiti, and the only reason everyone who's indigenous is called Indian is because of his mistaken landing on this continent. That's at least the one good thing that came out of it. We all became Indians. And of course, the word Indian is only derived from a river. Anyone living beyond the Indus was called an Indian. The Britishers just started calling it, started calling us Hindus, but in a new way. Everyone in India was a Hindu. The Arabs couldn't pronounce Indus as Indus. They always had a h in the pronunciation. And that's why, for them the river was the Hindu. The people beyond it were the land of Hindustan. Hindustan didn't mean the land of a particular religious community. I mean, if you think of it, Christ's apostle came. Indian Christianity is as old as Christianity anyway. The Syrian Christians of South India, of Kerala. Sufism as ancient. And then, of course, we are the land of the birth of Sikhism and Buddhism and Jainism. And all of this bundle was called the Hindus. But of course, once Columbus had set sail and landed here, and then the Spaniards spread their wings all across the Americas and took the gold and took the silver, the British didn't want to be left behind. So 400 years ago, they created what is the dominant organized form of organizing for inequality, the corporation. We assume it's been timeless, and we sometimes mix up business and the corporation. Now, if I do a little bit of business, I make a mess, I pollute this river, the community will punish me. in business, you can't get away from liability. The limited liability corporation was created in order to escape liability. And liability then basically meant that if you get the gold and your ship comes home, it belongs to you. But if either the French or the Dutch have captured it, then society pays for the losses. You never lose. It's the socialism of costs and the capitalism of profits. Of course, there was no capitalism at that point. This is the beginning of capitalism. And who were the people who got together? 300 merchant adventurers of London went to the Queen, who wrote a charter. They got the rights to create private armies and invade other countries, which is what they did with India. The East India Company first had battles in the south, and then the Battle of Plassey, 1757. And the only reason they won is they bribed the general of the Nawab of Bengal, who deliberately lost the war and then became very rich. And Clive became super rich. He became the richest man of England after a while. And eventually he was tried. And he says, but you should feel sorry for me because I could have taken so much more. There was so much to take. India at that time was 25% of the world economy, which is why they wanted to come, which is why they formed the first corporation as East India Company. And then the Dutch had their Dutch East India Company, and the French had their French East India Company. By the time the British left, it was 2%. That's the roots of inequality. So when we want to organize for equality, we have to understand where does it come from and how is it structured and how is it maintained. Those structures of power that create inequality have to be understood in order to address the issue of inequality. And of course, basically it was about greed, and it was grabbing resources. And beyond a point, people will rise. There's no country that was colonized where people did not rise. And in India, it was 1857 when the first movement for independence started. In history, it's written as the Sepoy Mutiny. It was much more than the Sepoy Mutiny. It was about land being taken away. It was about people going hungry. If you look at the rate of famines that increased in India during that time. And of course, landlessness was created. Because like all indigenous cultures, we did not believe you can have property in land. You could have use rights in land, and therefore the difference between usufructory rights and property rights. And in terms of use, it's the land you can farm. And there's a limit to that. And of course, all records show that because it was about use, men and women had the same rights, because at the end of the day, women do the work. And if your access to resources is connected to the work you do, in those systems, women are not unequal. It's in the property rights system that suddenly they have no private property. And of course, how was property created? What I find fascinating about the intellectual architecture that was built and continues to sustain this unequal system. And I had to read a lot of the philosophy classics. But it's only when I started to become an activist, I wanted to understand what's the root of property. So I go and read Locke. And what does Locke say? Property is created by mixing labor with nature. But not everyone's labor. Not the labor of the ox and the horse and the women and the serf. The spiritual labor of the man who owns the serf and the horse. So of course he totally justified the takeover of the lands of indigenous people. And he was writing his book. He wasn't sitting here, he was sitting in England. He was writing his book when the enclosures were taking place, where the commons were being enclosed. He's not writing about the enclosures, because there it would be seen very nakedly as a resource grab. But by taking the narrative and planting it in America, he can now make the narrative a narrative of civilization, of civilizing. They let their bison roam free, and therefore they can't have property. If you look at, because I've had to deal with so many of these issues in the ecology movement, supporting communities, whether it's forests as commons or river issues or the seed issue. In Australia, the justification was, well, first of all, they created a jurisprudence based on empty land. If a land is not colonized by whites, it's empty. It's empty because the others are not human. They are part of the fauna and flora. Until about 10 years ago, the Encyclopedia Britannica said that the Aboriginal people were part of the fauna and flora. They weren't fully human. And in the zoos of Europe at the time of colonization, they'd have animals and they would have black people in cages. But the category created then was terra nullius, the empty land. And all these debates are going on that, no, there are people who live here, and the justification there of takeover of an entire continent was they don't grow apples. That was the basis of saying they are barbarians. They don't grow apples. So of course, Columbus then further got the help very rapidly of the Pope, who wrote a papal bull of 1493. And I think it's a very important document to read, where the diversity of cultures were defined as barbarian on the basis of race and religion. And I often say, I said, part of organizing for equality is saying, yeah, we are barbarians, but not in your sense. We see ourselves as part of nature, not like you, thinking you're masters and owners and conquerors and creators. Because that creation myth just doesn't stop. Columbus discovering America is part of that creation myth. As if there were no people here before that, nobody had come, he was the first. And I have to often tell very well-meaning activists who say, you're very lucky, you have such a long history of farming. We don't have such a long history. I said, you do, it's just that you ignore the real history. You forget that the first people of these continents have farmed forever. Just go learn from them. And for me, the biggest lesson I've learned from our indigenous agriculture is the lesson of diversity. You go to Midwest, it's all a monoculture of corn. No indigenous culture grows corn alone. It's always the three sisters. And through that you realize that actually diversity supports each other and creates all kinds of richness. The richness of more food, the richness of healthier soils, the richness of being able to know your capacity to cooperate. Because what we are up against really is competition having been made a religion. If you go to have a culture of greed, it has to be supported by the idea of competition. And you're left behind because you weren't competitive. The countries are left behind. I mean, the WTO agreement is only about competition. Earlier we used to have antitrust bodies. Our antitrust body was called MRTP, the Monopoly and Restricted Trade Practices. It was about monopoly. It had to be renamed the Competition Commission. WTO itself is defined as encouraging competition around the world. The East India Company actually wrote the first free trade agreement. A lot of people think the first one was WTO. No. In 1716, a free trade agreement was written by bribing the Mughal courts. A lower-level clerk of a collapsing Mughal emperor was given 500 rupees. That's $10. But coming back to the resistance, coming back to the fact that people organized, it was very beautiful. I really learned this only 10 years ago because I was called by our government to celebrate 150 years of that first movement of independence. And because it built Navdanya around seed and food diversity, they said, will you make 150 chapatis, 150 kinds of bread? So I said, why are you asking us to make bread? And then I realized that the way the movement spread was by passing bread. Because if you were heard talking to each other for organizing for equality, you were shot, you were hung, you were killed. So in order to spread the word, bread was passed. And if you accepted the bread, you were becoming part of the movement. So we made 150. This year's 160 years. It's also 100 years of Gandhi's first civil disobedience after returning to India. Gandhi was part of the privileged. He'd gone to England to become a lawyer. His first job was in South Africa, where he woke up to race. Because, he was a privileged lawyer, and there was not the kind of racism that but what he experienced in South Africa, he didn't experience it while studying law. But then he was thrown off a first-class compartment, which his clients were paying for him. And he suddenly woke up, there's something called race. Then he woke up more, because I think it was probably 1906, they started to segregate society. It wasn't fully apartheid then, but they started to create a compulsory registration system that you've got to register according to race, being white, being brown, and Indian, and being black. But first they tried it on Indians because many of them were professionals, and many of them had come as businessmen, and many had come as indentured labor. And that's the time he applied the idea of not cooperating with unjust law. And he and his wife and many Indians were arrested. And basic response was, we are one citizenry. We might be different in color, but that doesn't take away our common citizenship. When he came back to India, he was asked to join the movement that was already taking place. And in those days of the British colonial empire, basically it was around cotton. The world was woven into one exploitation. The indigenous people in the United States, which wasn't a United States at that time, it was a disid-United States, like it's becoming once again. The indigenous people's land was taken. When you grab so much land, you then grab people to work the land. So Africans had to be captured as slaves. And for 200 years, there was no technology driving this wealth accumulation. It was pure naked war. In India, farmers were being forced to grow indigo. And during the American Civil War, cotton. In the cotton areas, which was more in the Deccan, there was a rebellion. The British always called these riots. But this was a fascinating movement. People said, you're indebting us, and we will not pay our debts. And they marched in hundreds of thousands and burnt the debt records. We will not pay. In 1810, they wanted everyone in Banaras, which, as you know, is such an ancient city. The British had come just 16 years before, and they said, pay us taxation. And people walked out of the city and said, we will not. You didn't build this city, these houses don't belong to you, and you can't just tax. The word they created in India was called Lagan. As some of you might have seen a film by Amir Khan called Lagan. But it's basically collecting rents from things you don't really own. That's the basis of the landlessness. That's the basis of the famines. That's the basis of the poverty that was created in India. Indigo was the other ingredient of this slavery because they needed this blue dye and were forcing farmers to grow the indigo, and farmers were prevented from growing food. Very, very rigorous system where planters went with horseback and whips, and if they found you working in your little patch of vegetables, you had to go back for the indigo cultivation. So 1917 is when Gandhi joined the movement to say we won't plant indigo. We'd rather die than plant indigo. It's a very special year for us because it's 100 years since then. Now, 1857, this first corporation was challenged, and the unity of all people in India led to it being wrapped up. But the British just replaced the rule with the rule of the crown. And what was added with that was a simple recognition that when people act together, you can't rule them. You can't exploit them. So they added, besides the war elements and the violence elements and the theft of resources, they added a whole new strategy called divide and rule. Now, because as I mentioned, Indians and Hindus were all the people, it was a geographical indicator. It was not a religious indicator. People would see themselves as a Hindu Muslim, a Hindu Christian, a Hindu Sikh. And they started, first of all, they started to create a whole new identity construction. And then they created the census. And in the first census, everyone wrote Hindu Muslim or Muslim Hindu. They said, no, you have to be one or the other. So the next time the census had, you can only fill one slot. You have to be either a Hindu or a Muslim. Now, at the ground level, people didn't accept that still. But society was being re-engineered, and by 1947, the whole partition was based on these artificial constructions, and these artificial constructions are coming back to haunt us. And they're being used now for the new organizing for inequality. So I did quantum theory, and the 4 or 5 key issues of quantum theory that are different from the colonizing idea of a mechanistic science, which is also a child of colonialism. The idea that nature is dead allows you to go take away resources. And in fact, Boyle even said the crazy sense that native people have of reverence for the earth is an impediment in our empire over lesser creatures. And the lesser creatures included all other life, but it included all other races. And the empire over lesser creatures requires a science that says nature is dead, that nature is fragmented, nature is separate from it, within itself, and we are separate from nature. It's also the basis of an extractive logic. Because then, you lack that bit of mineral, you can take that out. You lack the river for this much megawatt of energy, you can dam it up. And everything becomes extractable, everything becomes a commodity. With hindsight, those of us who suffered this, those of us who know our histories, know it was about war and violence and appropriation. But the official narrative is England became rich because it was innovative, it created industrialism, industrialism generated wealth, and wealth is what has made the northern countries rich. That narrative is carrying on today. And the pattern that's being repeated now is a return of colonialism but through carving new colonies. I woke up to this new creation of colonies because very early I got involved in how the corporations wanted to write new free trade agreements. The GATT wanted to own life through patents, wanted to push GMOs in order to do patents. And I often joke and say, in Monsanto's worldview, GMO basically means God move over. We will now function as the creators and we will collect rents from the seed that renews itself. And farmers will be forced to pay royalties. In India, this has meant, even though we've succeeded in preventing patents on seed and patents on life, our law says plants and animals are not inventions, therefore you cannot own a patent on it. Yet they collect royalties with illegality. And I've fought many, many cases, but they've extracted 500 million rupees. The price of seed jumped 80,000%. Farmers were left in deep debt, and it triggered an epidemic of farmer suicides. More than 300,000 now. Yeah? It's an issue I deal with day and night. Not just having to go to these areas and constantly visit the farmers, document the causes, but then have to deal with the attacks when you speak the truth. The amount of I don't know how many Monsanto lobbyists have got jobs just because the truth that farmers of India are committing suicide is now recorded, and they have to say, no, it's not true. It's not true. She cooks it up. We are in this very strange world, as you know, of alternative facts. Yeah? So every truth becomes an alternative fact. And we are now in a period where these new colonies are literally every aspect of human life and human freedom. So seed has become a colony, both for mining genes and collecting rents. I call it Bij Lagan, like the Lagan for land. They're just collecting another Lagan. And in India, they follow it. The minute I say Bij Lagan, tribals will follow it. The farmers will understand what's going on and will organize. But the last 20 years have seen something more explode. If you look at who are the 10 richest men, and what do? They do nothing. They collect rents. They are giants in 2 sectors of the economy: information technology and finance. Do they work to generate this kind of wealth? No. In information technology, they have 2 sources of wealth creation: patents. Microsoft's and Bill Gates' wealth comes out of the patents. And he hasn't stopped. My 2 new books, one of them is on Gates. And it's to show that he's not he's not a philanthropist. He's using his money to first save taxes and then invest in sectors where he will make money tomorrow. I won't go into those details, but he's driving a lot of patents on seed and genetic wealth right now. And every crazy idea about our food, making golden rice, doing GMO banana to increase iron. Do you look at a banana for iron, or do you look at your spinach and your moringa? Oh, banana. One man sitting in Seattle finances another man sitting in Queensland in Australia. But is it about increasing iron? Is it about increasing vitamin? No, it's about taking the 2 countries that have the richest diversity of banana, but are totally independent in growing it: India and Uganda. And this is where the GMO banana is being pushed. Because they would like to turn our independent diversity. In India we have, 150 varieties still, it used to be thousands. You go to Kerala, and the tiniest of shops will have 20 kinds of bananas hanging. They don't like that. They want the Chiquita. They want one variety that will be patented. And that's the market, that's the rent collection. Mr. Facebook says he's helping you make friends. But what's he doing through it? He's collecting your data as a commodity to sell to someone else. That's where his money comes from. And of course, in the financial world, it's pure speculation. Because you are here to organize for equality. Last year, Monsanto, who's my favorite company, announced they were going to merge with Bayer. And Bayer has a history. It was literally born and got big during Hitler's. He was they were part of IG Farben. They made the gases for the concentration camps. They were tried at Nuremberg for all of this. And now they're merging. So I want to do an analysis of, who's worth how much and who owns how much of whom. Because it wasn't making sense, Bayer at one level on the seed side is a smaller company, Monsanto's the giant, and yet Bayer was going to buy Monsanto. And so my son helped me do research. There are 5 financial corporations whose investors own the company. In Wall Street, the investors are not the owners. But these new financial instruments, the investors are the owners, and you don't know who the investors are because it's not a public information. These top 5 companies have basically the majority shares of any corporation who touches your life today. If you drink Coke and Pepsi, they own that. The Wall Street banks themselves are owned by them. The Monsantos and the Syngentas and the Bayers are all owned by them. So what you have is the corporation which was created with the 1600 charter of Queen Elizabeth has an even narrower group, owning every corporation of the world. And their way of creating inequality now is first, go and criminalize activities of freedom. If farmers save seeds, try and make it illegal. And my dedication for the last 30 years has been to organize to not just prevent this criminalization of seed saving, but to celebrate our seed saving as a duty and as a freedom. And we've succeeded. We've created 120 community seed banks. I've even worked with my government to, like I said, laws that prevent this kind of patenting, that other countries, and it's 2014 onwards, they came back again to make local seeds illegal. And in the US, we managed to block our law. In the US, at the same time, a similar law was passed. And 2 years ago, they started to send notices to local seed libraries, they call them. Our seed banks are farmers, you have volumes that you can buy. Seed libraries are little packages that go into a public library. Libraries used to have index cards. When I used to go to the library at Western, we used to work with index cards. You don't have index cards anymore, but there are these index card holders, so people put their little seeds into these holders. And then do exchange. Someone comes and takes the tomato, returns it. They started to get notices, you are agri-terrorists if you use these seeds. So we've helped state after state. Europe, they tried to ban local seeds in Europe in 2014. And I did one long seed pilgrimage from the countries in the south which are the richest in biodiversity, Greece, Italy, France. I worked with the European Parliament, and these laws were blocked. But I've also learned that, if they can come back to colonize 500 years later again, in spite of all our movements for decolonization, there's never a giving up for them. But there's never a giving up for us either. Another Criminalization is through food laws, food safety laws. If you make your own cheese, or if you have 3 chickens in your backyard and you slaughter them, that is a crime. But if you have a factory farm with 1 million chickens and you're torturing them to death, that's safe, that's good. Another element of this colonization, as the old colonization, is the billionaires write the laws. The East India Company wrote the laws. The Spaniards wrote the laws wherever they went. And part of the lawmaking is take away the rights and resources of indigenous people and have no law for yourself. You are governed through deregulation, which is why neoliberalism goes hand in hand with deregulation. You know, all the debates around environmental agencies being shut down, the EPA being diluted, climate decisions being reversed, is all part about that deregulation. Violence, of course, continues to be a tool. And the old violence is coming back in new ways. There's violence against women. I did a piece when this very tragic rape of Nirbhaya took place in 2013. And our Prime Minister of that time and basically said, you know, all these footloose villagers who come to cities are causing a problem. And in a debate on TV, I had to say, Mr. Prime Minister, these are not footloose migrants from the villages. These are refugees of your policies of neoliberalism. And of course you brutalize people. And then they brutalize others that they can. So you've got this epidemic of violence against women. And I did a piece then called Violence Against Women and Violence of the Economy and the connections between the two. We are seeing new attacks on indigenous people. I don't know how many warriors, ecological warriors, we've lost in the last few years. Berta from Honduras being one of them. There's new attacks on all kinds of diversity, every kind of diversity. In my own country, huge attacks on the Dalits and huge new attacks on the Muslims. And part of what we are doing for Organizing for Equality is letting people remember that there's nothing Indian about this. This is what the British did. So you are, in a way, playing out a colonial script to give license to yourself to attack minorities. The divide and rule issue is very, very intimately linked to an economics of inequality. And if after 1857, the divide and rule was used as a cultural technology, I do believe it's being very cleverly crafted today as a protection of the 1%. Because if this is not done, we are going to unify. We are going to organize. In the United States, the migrant workers who are running the farms would have worked with the unemployed whites whose factories migrated to China. It would have been this next step of organizing. How do you prevent it from happening? You go to the unemployed white worker, and then you make every migrant look like the enemy. And it isn't an accident that just around the time Bush was invading Iraq in the name of Operation Freedom, what was it called? It had freedom in its name. Iraqi freedom. That's around the time where Samuel Huntington wrote his book on Clash of Civilizations. And the Islamophobia, the seeds of Islamophobia started to get planted. Of course, every conflict of the Middle East has its roots in trying to take over countries for oil. And Huntington has actually written and said, you can only know who you are when you know who you hate. I think the challenge for us, for Organizing for Equality, is to absolutely resist the narrative. That we know who we are in our diversity because we love each other. Diversity is no reason for fear and hate. It is a reason for celebration. In India, a discourse started about intolerance, and I won't again bore you with the details of how poor Bollywood film stars had to apologize because they happened to mention that intolerance is growing, and our top writers who gave back their awards when a Muslim was killed in the name of saving the cow, one by one, literary people started to give back awards and said, this is not acceptable. And the word intolerance was made a dirty word. You cannot speak against intolerance. The other day I was with an artist, I was giving a talk, and she used the word. I said, don't use that word. Use the word celebrate diversity. Don't work from a place of defensiveness, because that's what they want you to feel. They've already fixed the polarizations. And they're all linear polarizations. We have to transcend each of those polarizations and not engage in it. And that does not mean we don't recognize our histories. It does not mean that we're not aware of differences that are true and real. But we also recognize a simple fact that for the first time in human evolution, we have one commonality, that our species could be wiped out. That should be a major reason for organizing for equality. And it's the first time. You know, when Spaniards went to America or the British came to India, every Britisher was a privileged person. Gandhi went to England and said, our struggle in India is the same as your struggle, and he went and met the workers in the textile industry. If we are all part of 99%, we'd better organize as 99%. And not fall into this trap of being divided and occupying all our energies in dissipation. Of course, you're going to have Kate Pickett speak tomorrow, and she and Richard Wilkinson had done such amazing work on the issues of inequality and how deeply it's related to disease and ill health. That's where they began, because suddenly they started to find a lot more sickness in England. Piketty has written a book and says we are returning to the period of the robber barons. The kind of disproportionate wealth is the same. But the figures that really shock me are the ones where 6 years ago it was 388 men controlling half the wealth of the world. It dropped to 62 last year, which was already a shock. And the Oxfam report said they could be put in a bus. Now it's 8 men. How much will it be next year? And how many more years before we have genocidal concentration of wealth? It is a genocide, and it's a genocide that is being legitimized in the same language as in the beginning of colonialism. I happened to come to the US for a lecture tour soon after the election, and they just had this meeting of a new phenomena called the alt-right. It's the first time I heard the word, alt-right. And they'd had this gathering in Washington, D.C., and this was on one of the speeches of one of the people, which is reproduced in a newspaper, and I immediately saved that newspaper. It says, America was until the last generation a white country designed for ourselves and our posterity. It is our creation. It is our inheritance, and it belongs to us. That's the mentality from where the bans on migration are coming. That's the mentality from where people, 3 Indians have been shot in the last 2 weeks. Professional Indians who are American citizens. Because when you allow that kind of insecurity and hate to grow, then ignorance becomes a reason to think, everyone brown is a Muslim from some horrible country in the Middle East. This feeding of insecurity has, of course, a material basis. That globalization has left people without jobs. It has left people insecure. And when you add to that insecurity a representative electoral democracy that has become one more wing of the money machine, it will make sure that hate is the only currency of electoral politics. And it is spreading everywhere. And I can even see the language being reproduced everywhere, because the same handful of right-wing newspapers shaping the language. In US, you had a legal case decision, the Citizen United. But in new free trade agreements, you have something called ISDS, the Interstate Dispute Settlement Systems, where corporations have a right to sue governments to dismantle what remaining public good we have. So how do we organize for equality? We have to, as I said, have unity in diversity. For too long, we've been made to believe by that essentialized mechanical thinking that if we are different, we have nothing in common. The most fundamental aspects of our lives are common. We breathe the same air. We eat food that comes from the same soil. We face the same kind of climate disasters. When our water is polluted, we have the same consequences. In our species being, we are one. 500 tomatoes or the 200,000 rice varieties don't go around fighting each other. They are happy with their diversity, and it's time for us to celebrate. So, when this whole process was starting, I created a movement which was at that time more around the whole agriculture and seed issue, and we called it Diverse Women for Diversity. I think we could make it Diverse Cultures for Diversity. Reclaiming our commons has to be a very big part of dealing with this rent economy, where those who are super rich never work, and those who work get poorer and poorer by the day. In agriculture, I've done the analysis, we've done very detailed. 1% of the value of what a farmer is growing is reaching them. 1%. And it's the same for the Canadian farmer, it's the same for the Indian farmer, it's the same for the small farmer anywhere in the world. Because this whole system is designed to extract 99% for the corporations. And then turn whatever comes out of it into such horrible stuff that it makes us sick. 75% diseases are related to an industrial food system. 75% of the ecological destruction. 50% of the greenhouse gases. That's what my book, Soil Not Oil, is about. And how do we reclaim the commons? 3 ways. First, by realizing that we have a lot in common, that we are communities, even if we have diversity. Margaret Thatcher had to say, there is no society, there are only individuals, to initiate neoliberalism in England. It's essential to atomize and fragment us. It's another level of divide and rule. The second is, we have to have the courage and the fearlessness to resist unjust systems and not participate in them. This is what Satyagraha is about. But you can only get that courage when you know the deeper laws that govern our lives. And the deeper laws are laws that come from the earth and laws that come from our cultures. Our cultures that taught us to be respectful of diversity, our cultures that taught us our human duties for equality, that taught us our ability to be one. even when different. All indigenous educational systems are about nourishing the diverse potential of every child. They're not about machines to churn out slaves for the 1% industry. And we have to be creative in creating alternatives, because the system that is destroying our societies, our democracy, our livelihoods, is a system that's destroying the planet and benefiting nobody. So I work very closely with the government of Bhutan, which decided years ago they were not going to chase growth. They were not going to measure GDP and gross national product. They're going to measure gross national happiness and well-being of their people. So I work with them to help make Bhutan 100% organic. But the issue of well-being is so important because GDP has been made the god of our times. When money is the religion, then GDP is the baptism, or communion. I might be wrong because I'm not too familiar, but it is whatever makes you a believer. All that GDP is as an instrument of war. During the war, they had to mobilize more resources. How do you get resources? Societies circulate their wealth. They work in circular economies. If I want to fight more, buy more fighter jets, have bigger armies, I'm going to suck out from society. How do you suck out? By redefining wealth. And GDP is measured in terms of the assumption that if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So women don't work, indigenous people don't contribute, peasant economies don't contribute. Suddenly, all the economy that provides us health, real well-being, disappears. And wealth, the original meaning of wealth was well-being. So when we say we should look at well-being, we are basically saying let's go back to the real roots, not the distortion. Reclaiming our diverse stories, not to pit ourselves against each other, but while maintaining the uniqueness of our cultures, seeing how in the big narrative all our cultures said we are part of the earth. No culture, no indigenous culture said we are masters and owners and conquerors. Only the conqueror and colonizer says that. And we need these other stories because the creation myths that are allowing this violent enterprise to carry on, and as I said, it is now becoming a severe threat to the future of our species. So it's not the old-style class conflict. In the old-style class conflict, the worker lived. He just didn't get the full share of the surplus value they generated. But now, large chunks of humanity are disposable. They're not needed. And the whole dream now is farming without farmers, factories without workers. Not that they'll get there. All that they'll have is a lot more slave workers. I think we really have to start getting out of our silos, because even in organizing for equality, we built up neat silos. As women, we worked as women. As workers, we had the workers' movement. And when they trashed the unions, we didn't have a movement at all. There were farmers' movements. There's a health movement. There's an environment movement. There's a food sovereignty movement. I think it's time to see the connections amongst each other and in all of these issues. Bad food has become the single biggest reason for disease. Good food is the single biggest solution. Industrial farming is the single biggest reason for climate change. Organic farming is the single biggest solution to climate change. And you could just run through sector after sector and see, like the mycorrhizae that connects plants under the ground, quietly, invisibly, we too can be social mycorrhizae. And how does the mycorrhizal fungi organize? Does someone tell them? The nourishment lies there and this plant is deficient. They have the intelligence. Redefining intelligence rediscovering that the last microbe, the last child, the last person is bursting with intelligence. That has been stamped out. But the potential is there. And the whole architecture of some people being smart, the word smart, innovation, all over the place. They're buzzing around. But smart used to mean pain, and job used to mean cheating. I got jobbed meant I was cheated. So we've got to bring back the basic languages of our cultures, which allow us to be rooted in our true freedoms and our true unities and a true joy. I mean, we couldn't have more dismal times, but we have never been at a moment of our evolution where joining hands could make such a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. So we have time for questions up until 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. So I think do we have a microphone for the audience?
Thank you very much for the great work that you're doing for all of us. Would you agree that the heart of the power of the wealthy elites is their control through the banking system of creation of money out of nothing? And would you support the movement, the growing movement for the creation of public banks that are designed to restore that power of creating money out of nothing to public institutions for public benefit, as in Canada, where we have our publicly owned Bank of Canada, which has not been used for its original purpose since 1974, and hence we're in growing debt and suffering from austerity being thrust down our throats and massive privatization.
Well, definitely the whole financial system is now the driving force. And I mentioned the handful of corporations, financial corporations that own all the corporations. And I was looking at the data on this one, which is the biggest, and it's called Vanguard. And I never heard of it till I started to do research on who owns the Monsantos and who owns the Coca-Colas. Between last year, when I looked, which was about the middle of last year, and now, which is not even a year, their worth has increased from 3 trillion to 4 trillion. Yeah. So not only, making money out of nothing earlier was they just printed money. Now they don't even have to print. They just have to click. It's all digital now. And that's why India had this terrible banning of real cash to force India into the digital economy because, we were cushioned in 2008 from the Wall Street disaster because we deal in cash. And these corporations don't want us to have cash. I definitely support public banks. I support credit unions. I support any innovation where people get control of the wealth they generate. And the money reflects real wealth and real access to wealth.
Right in the middle. So maybe we can do this.
Hello. I
I definitely support your strategy of increasing local community sovereignty. But right now, artificial intelligence is very quickly approaching. And a lot of CEOs from Google and such have approached governments and said, you need to come up with a plan for how disruptive the technologies that we're developing are. Do you think that the AI route has a hope for organizing equality, or that eventually it will just fall apart down to the local food sovereignty?
I think there is a difference between real things and representation. I've been looking at where's Monsanto going. Where's Monsanto going? They want a digital agriculture, but you don't eat digits. I mean, they actually, I think because we created a seed movement, they have a website now, and they mail me all the time a thing called Seeds and Chips. And they don't mean chips like tapioca chips or banana chips or potato chips. They mean chips like in the digital world. Monsanto bought up the world's biggest climate data corporation, the world's biggest soil data corporation, just in the last 2 years. It's bought up 16 Silicon Valley companies. The Climate Data Corporation, which it now owns, is aiming at looking at $3 trillion profits annually by linking the climate disasters, the data on climate, and insurance. They're working with John Deere, the tractor company, to put spyware in the farm machinery so that when it goes over the farmer's field, it knows exactly how much moisture there is, it knows how much nitrogen, phosphorus. They can't measure the mycorrhizae, but they can do the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and moisture. And that goes as big data, which is all artificial intelligence is this issue of processing big data. Goes to Monsanto, which sells it back now as a commodity. My next book's title is called Resurgence of the Real, because we are so ruled by illusions and false promises. The illusions, the three big illusions are, the world is a machine. That's given the mechanistic paradigm. The second big illusion is the kind of thing you mentioned about that's where wealth is created. And the third big illusion is democracy is about the billionaires capturing our electoral machines. So I say it's mutated democracy being of the people, by the people, for the people, into of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. I do believe that we need to defend our real relationships. Facebook friends can never be the kind of friends you have when you're sick or when you just want to share a joy. The real world is the place where organizing has to happen. There's no escape from it. The very, very brilliant book written by a neurosurgeon who's also a linguistic, who's saying our biggest tragedy right now is we no more know what's real. And we'll march into our extinction with this inability to differentiate.
Thank you so much for everything you've studied and brought forth. I was reminded when George stood up and talked about having our own banking system, and I'm wondering if people think it's possible. I feel that we are a global family and celebrate unity and diversity for sure. I think we're all one family and we live on one planet. And coming from an earth-based culture, I was a farm girl from Alberta, and healthy food, healthy community, and there 30 years later, and they're spraying Monsanto's famous chemical 5 times a season on every field. And it kind of sickens me, and I think, okay, what now, besides education? But do you think it's possible that we could construct a corporation of our own? Is it possible? Can we envision that? I know recently I've heard of this divestment, take your energy out of that which no longer serves us. Do you think it's possible to start our own corporation with our own finance system and let their cards fall? Can we do it? I mean, that's my question.
Well, to respond, who was the feminist who said, you can't break the master's house with the master's tool? Audre Lorde, yeah. Well, the corporation was created to colonize and exploit and run away from responsibility and liability. So I don't think one needs to model our organizing on that which is designed only to exploit. I think organizing for equality means recognizing our true powers and our true creativity. 500 years, the recognition of our own creativity, our deep identities, has been denied to us, and we've absorbed all of this. So we are now at the stage where we think, if you don't have money, you have nothing. And we have to wait. I mean, this is why I've started the Earth University in Navdanya, and I'm now organizing journeys to see communities that have no money, but have everything. They have their food, they have their culture, they have their solidarity. I think we need to learn once again how to be in community as humans and in communities with the earth, and realize that the currency of that community is not money. I've said this many times. The currency of life is life. The currency of organizing is solidarity.
Like most people here, thank you so very much. You've been an inspiration for my family. This is my daughter, who's beside me. And the reason I've introduced her is because my daughter's blind and has a number of health issues. And we have often talked about how community would help us deal with that, but without that community, what helps her is technology. So although I'm a Luddite, she's argued very forcefully and made me have to reconsider my position that technology is what allows her to participate in the world. So I guess my question is, how do we navigate what is good for us and what is not good for us? How do we project it forward and see?
She wants to say something.
Let me just piggyback on Mom's question for, I suppose, and phrase it slightly differently, which is that yes, as a person with disabilities, and many people with disabilities do very much depend on technology for our quality of life. Even while I absolutely take your point that Facebook friends aren't the same thing as having someone really there when you're sick, that, do you see any useful role for technologies of that kind, or do you think that we simply need to get rid of them all and go back to a low-tech way of life?
Well, when you say technology, you elevate it to some magical system. When you realize all that a technology is a tool, then you start to differentiate between different kinds of technology. Yeah? When you say technology and you say, are you for it or against it, you are making it a god. But tools, you have been empowered by certain tools that have allowed you to overcome your disability. That is not technology, but a useful tool. And you made the choice. When you don't make the choice, and Monsanto gets more power over your life, then it is a tool of domination. And our basic sensibilities have to guide us into letting us know what allows us to expand our ability to live well, and what shrinks that ability, what expands our freedoms, and what shrinks that freedom.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. I'm such a fan of yours, so it's a great honor to actually hear you speak. I just have a quick question, and perhaps it's not the best question to ask, but it's very dear to my heart. There is a lot of violence that is committed to students who organize, particularly when organizing. So we talk of solidarity and we almost talk about it as though it's a dream, just because so often, either within the community or outside of the community, power is exerted in such a way as to silence. So, sorry, I'm out of breath. What I want to ask is, how do student organizers heal in order to be able to go back out there to continue the work? Or how do you personally heal throughout your many years of activism? What has worked for you?
When you're as old as I am, you'll heal by transcending yourself. Because there are two ways one can think of the self. One is as an extended self, which is the reality, actually. Yeah, I'm just realizing, I've just finished a book, and I found out that we are 90% bacteria. We're only 10% human. So we shouldn't take ourselves that seriously. We should take our bacteria a little more seriously. But the other aspect of it is, and here I've learned a lot from Gandhi, and we organize every year. We organize 2 really powerful courses. Our farm is available for training for farmers throughout the year and for interns, wherever they come from. But there are 2 of my favorite courses. One is a month-long A to Z for agroecology, but the other is a course on Gandhi globalization and gross national product. How do you stay strong in times when the system wants to cripple you and take away all your power? So all of Gandhi's words were swa, swadeshi, swaraj. That swa is about being grounded in yourself. It's not about the selfish self. It's not about the limited self, but it's about the expanded self, but never losing the sense of your grounding.
Finding your grounded self. I think for a lot of people here in this room, they wouldn't know their ancestry, their indigenous roots. And so a few years ago, I had a client tell me that she was in a really bad situation because her mother was arrested for growing marijuana, or grandmother, sorry, was arrested for growing marijuana. She was Lithuanian, and during the First and Second World Wars, she set up a hospital in her barn, which was all run by using native plants and herbal remedies to treat these soldiers that had been injured on the battlefield and had wandered into the villages. So she was very proud of her grandmother and saw that the medical legal system was attempting to destroy her and discredit her. And she's just an old 80-year-old lady who's making some soup. So what I'm getting at here is that I've watched some people go back to their roots, to their beginnings, and make themselves all over again in a much stronger form than they are as they exist as a person in this culture. And so I wonder how much of that we could do with the people here in London.
Well, in a way, it's connected to the question earlier, because, each of us can think of ourselves in a very atomized and say, what's my personal history and what are my personal roots? And the other is we can see ourselves as community and see that there are diversities of evolutions, and all of them enrich us. And what are those rich diversities that we can explore to enhance our possibilities? But the issue of growing herbs, Indian Ayurveda, which is the most sophisticated medicine system in the world, it actually heals because it sees the body as a living system that's self-organized. It was made illegal in India. Even now, Ayurvedic drugs are banned in your country, in Canada. Even though you have a so-called public health system, but it has no space to allow the truly safe medicine. And it's banned in the name of not being safe. Yeah? Just like artisanal food is banned in the name of not being safe, and toxic food is always approved. So I think we have to transcend atomistic thinking about ourselves, because that will just get us deeper and deeper and deeper, into loneliness and into hopelessness. When we realize that in this land, the roots are the roots of the indigenous people of this land, and any future evolution has to be learning from those roots, then we'll find our way.
I just want to let everyone know I have acknowledged 3 hands, so we have 3 more questions. Are you still good?
Sure.
Okay. So, of those 3, shall we add 2 more, and then I'll just say we'll go for 5 total? Sure. So, I've acknowledged you, I've acknowledged you, and I've acknowledged you at the back. And so, anybody else, quickly, we've got 2 more after that. Okay, so we've got 1 at the back and 1 here. Okay. Thank you so much for your willingness. I'm going to start back here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your presentation was beautiful and empowered me, and I know empowered many people. I really appreciate. I want to answer, with your permission, some of the questions about if it's possible to create alternatives to capitalism in London, Ontario. And I want to answer, yes, they already exist. We have free schools where we share skills between each other, so we don't have to pay for education, and we receive integral education between each other. We have amazing people wanting to read books together and educate other people, educated between each other. We have community gardens, a group named Food Not Lands and Food Not Bombs, where we create community gardens to fight, again, like paying for food and capitalism. Food Not Bombs, we collect the food that is going to be thrown out, and we make community meals. When I came to London, I didn't know anything, any organization. What I did, I create my own event. I create a Monsanto walk or march, and just 1 person show up after like 2 hours. And that 1 person introduced me to all the community. So it worked at the end. And then you go to Facebook, and instead of giving their information, you use them. So you look for the Q words. So you look feminism, and you start appearing all the groups that are associated to feminism. Against Monsanto, you will find 10 groups, 20 groups that are against Monsanto. And that's the best way to engage. And we need help. We are burning down. We are exhausted. It's too much to do. And please look for us. Please get involved. Yes, we can do it, and we are doing it.
Thank you so much, Luisa. And I really want to thank you for raising those that information and sharing it, because it reminds me, I was remiss. We will be having an activist strategy session tomorrow over the lunch hour. I believe it's here. So it'll be lunch and strategy, and it's open to everyone. It's not, there's nothing else going on at the same time. And it's for exactly that idea, is coming up with ideas, saying what's happening now, and looking at possible ways of connecting with each other. I just want to make sure we get through I see some folks needing to leave, so let's get through our questions. If you can try and be a little bit abbreviated, if you can.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, for being here. We really appreciate your presence, and it's truly an honor to hear a brilliant woman of color speak. My question is in regards to your comment that the 99% should get together and organize for equality, as well as the 1% organizes for inequality. My question is, how do we do that when within the 99%, the hierarchy of white supremacy very much still exists, And not just with organizers today, even with organizers like Gandhi, who was very, very anti-Black. How do we band together and organize with people who barely view us as human, who justify when we face police brutality, who believe we come from violent cultures and races and religions? How do we hold hands with these people and try and move forward when white supremacy only serves white supremacy and doesn't serve the rest of us? How do we gather together and truly become, true solidarity?
Well, the first thing is, for me, organizing is not separate from living. When things were comfortable, then you lived and you organized. But when things are on the edge, you have to organize in ways that you can also live, and your living must enhance the organizing for creating alternatives. You don't deal with white supremacy by thinking that every white person is a white supremacist. You look for solidarity wherever it is. Wherever it is. That's what I meant by not falling into essentializing traps.
Hello? Oh, there we are. Okay. Thank you very much for your talk this evening. I sense the strong undercurrent of spirituality that moves amongst our own being and moves and can motivate us into a conviction and a strength. I feel that at this moment there seems to be a group or a body of people who would try to make that less powerful, and they go by the influence of called the Humanist Manifesto. And I wonder if you could comment to that manifesto as it might pertain to us here in this room and our desire to meet and move together in unity and oppose that mindset and that philosophy that says that we are little more than just machines.
Well, the Ecomodernist manifesto is written by Monsanto lobbyists. I know each and every one of those names. So they've written it from a very defensive point of view. They've had to admit that issues of planetary limits, issues of ecological laws and systems can't be avoided. And then they've gone on to try and greenwash their push for systems that destroy ecosystems as if these are the systems that would protect the earth. So they talk about, issues of industrial agriculture and genetic engineering because it's the only way you'll be able to protect wilderness. Why is that so misplaced? First, because GMO soya has destroyed more forests than any indigenous community ever could have. The entire expansion into the Amazon or into the forests of Argentina, cerrados of Argentina, this is all for that same model that they say will save the planet. And so you can be eco-modernist. The very language of modernity, the very idea of the imperative to be modern comes out of that colonizing mission, because there is something contemporary, we are all sitting here in the today 2017. The modern is an ideological category. It decides certain things as modern, it declares other things as traditional, and by the very definition describes what is modern as superior and what is traditional as inferior. Now, in indigenous agriculture is turning out to be much more superior. Every report and our own work, if in India we farm the way Navdanya farms, we could feed 2 times India's population. That is being futuristic in terms of not destroying the planet. And when you raise the issue of spirituality, Gandhi has a very interesting little book, and he writes in that, this civilization seeks only bodily comfort and fails miserably even in providing that. Because, if industrial food is supposed to be for bodily comfort and all that you have is very sick people, it's failed in that enterprise. Spirituality is only recognizing the interconnections and recognizing that the mechanistic construction of the world fails because it's not material enough. It's not material enough because it totally fails in understanding connections, and therefore destroys the materiality. But that same interconnectedness is what is spirituality, the awareness of that. So I'll just cite two of spiritual leaders of our times. I'm so grateful to Pope Francis. I don't essentialize the Pope, because we had a Pope Alexander 1493 and the Papal Bull. And you have a Pope Francis today who is the voice of people, and his encyclical, The Voice of the Earth too, calls it, talks about the earth as Mother Earth, something all of Christianity has gone around saying, no, you are a barbarian if you think the earth is sacred. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, leading spiritual teacher of our times, every talk of his in India these days is, if you are not engaging, if you are not an activist, you're not acting on your compassion, you have no compassion.
We have one final question, if you can offer your patience to the last person who's been waiting so patiently to ask that question. But before she asks it, I just want to let everyone know that there is a reception downstairs. So as you prepare your time and your departure, please stop by. There are drinks and refreshments.
Hi, Dr. Shiva. I've been very inspired by your work in ecofeminism. And I was just wondering if you could touch upon how the importance of ecofeminism in this movement towards environmental and social justice. Thank you.
So to start with, so many PhDs have been written on ecofeminism as essentialism. But the simple fact that it's not shows up in the fact that I now meet so many men who are ecofeminists. Because what's ecofeminism but seeing that the idea that nature is dead, which is the ecology part of it, and that women are passive is a stupid idea. Ecofeminism is merely being deeply aware of the creativity of nature and the power of nature and the creativity of women. And that same creativity is in men too. So it is not, for me, ecofeminism is a philosophy for all life on earth, including men and women, including people of every color and every religion, because it is about seeing where true creativity really lies, not in conquest, not in destruction. And I find this celebrating of the word disruption as it's the cutting edge. Well, that's all colonialism has ever done. It disrupted every culture it invaded. And every time a healthy cell is turned into a cancerous cell, it's a disruption of the self-regulation of that cell. And that's what shows how our thinking has gone so astray. Our Prime Minister was just applauded for being disruptor in chief. In his case, the two disruptions that combine, the social disruption through communal divides and joining the global money-making machine for taking away from ordinary hardworking Indians their economies. And that's my work, to constantly heal those divides and resist in creative ways.
Dr. Shiva, thank you so much. Thank you for your talk this evening. And thank you for staying a little long over time.
Thanks, Dehra.
Please join us for the reception downstairs.